Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Gottsagen. I lead research for ISG, and I'm pleased to be with Prashant Kelkar. He leads
Hi.
our consulting efforts in the Americas and is our chief strategy officer. Prashant, same time next year. A year ago, we did predictions for 2022, and the year flew by. I think you got most of them right. I have my scorecard here, and we're going to try this. And I think people found it interesting. There's so many trends that are happening. It almost makes your brain explode to try to track them all. And I'm going to try my best to just sort of pin you down and narrow you down on maybe three or so mega trends, and you can peel them back any way you want. But sound good?
Sounds perfect. Sounds
All right.
perfect, Paul. Looking forward.
All right. Well, let's just why don't you just lay the groundwork and give me a quick overview of what you think the top three trends will be. By the way, I should say Prashant spends almost all of his time in front of Fortune 500 or Global 2000 clients, working through some of the tough issues. So if anybody would have a sense of it, it would be Prashant. And given that, Prashant, what's an overview of the three megatrends for the upcoming year?
I like the way you said tough issues, Paul, because I guess that's exactly what the world's dealing with at the moment. So everything that you and I discussed, when was it? December last year, would have been looking at a very transformation rich, I would almost say cash rich market, which I guess changed on all of us starting June, July this year. So maybe the next 4 quarters start removing the froth from the markets, and what's left is actually the real stuff. But given that, I think a lot of these trends can be clubbed under three mega trends. So if we step away from technology and start looking at what are these technologies looking for to achieve in terms of outcomes, I would say the first thing we're noticing is a much more focus on industry specialization. So now, be it in terms of ecosystems or clouds or business platform as a service, much more focus on industry specialization, separate because I think each industry is feel this market in a different way. So we expect the next 4 or 6 quarters to be very nuanced in terms of which industry you are in. Which leads me to the second topic, and that is one thing that everybody's trying to do is to move from product to product as a service. So, and that's what we call servitization. Now, this is showing up in multiple ways, and the more asset rich you are as a firm, it's showing up much more in terms of software, electrical, mechanical coming together. It's leading us to areas like digital engineering, hyper connected revenue models, platform engineering, and the like. And the last mega trend I think would be sustainability. So if we step away from the acronym ESG and start looking at the S in particular, sustainability in terms of green tech, in terms of revenue, design for recycling and circular economies. So those would be the three mega trends.
All right, I can't wait to dive into them. They make sense on the one hand, but on the other hand, focusing on industry, focusing on as a service, focusing on anything green or sustainable have also been around for a long, long time. But you're obviously bringing it up because you're seeing some key trends there. So, sure, let's talk about. I know, like whenever I see announcements from the hyperscalers, they have a lot around industry cloud, which maybe a few years back that was not a thing. So definitely a lot of focus in terms of the offerings around specific industries. So let's dive into that one. Go ahead and explain why that one's such a key trend coming up.
I think of industry cloud as a skeleton, which has to be, you have to breathe life into that skeleton. And I would almost say there are more viewpoints in the market than just what the three hyperscalers are talking about. I expect industry clouds to start with the word industry before it starts with the word cloud. Because to look at industry clouds in another perspective would be to look at end to end stacks, end to end platforms as a service, which start with industry processes first. So if you go down that path, this is much more than just cloud. And I'm using air quotes cloud. It could be cloud, it could be AI, it could be assets, it could be edge, it could be AI on devices, it could be smart devices, it could be hyperconnectivity. When all of this comes together in a word that I prefer, and that is purpose built. If it's purpose built for an industry or it's purpose built for one process in an industry, you've got the first step towards industry cloud. So we will definitely have hyperscaler ambitions on industry cloud, but every single hyperscaler ambition can also be seen as a threat by one of our clients. So we're expecting actually niche players to stand up and start saying, well, this is what industry cloud look like in terms of utilities, in terms of oil and gas, in terms of energy, in terms of rail.
But is connected car an example of automotive connected uh, industry cloud?
Let's take an automotive example. I would say battery as a service.
Okay.
Battery as a service could be a platform as a service offering. Now, to do battery as a service, you would, of course, have to have batteries, but those batteries would have to be connected. And if you have connected batteries, you have an entire control tower managing these batteries. Now, each battery has three life stages. The first, of course, is in the car. The second is outside the car after it's sought its first fare. And the third could be in a battery farm. Now, how do you manage that end to end could be battery as a service. Now, how much of this has nothing to do with the battery, but it has to do with the platform on which all these services are running? There you go. You have an industry cloud for battery as a service. So you see what we just did. We looked at automotive, we took a sliver out of it and said there's the industry cloud for it. So I think that's a good example of how I think things are going to be much more purpose built as we go forward. So it's much easier to talk about which cloud do we do this on instead of saying which industry cloud, right? So what's the right mix of cloud plus assets plus edge plus AI to make this happen?
And Prashant, how do you, like we talked about hyperscalers, that's an obvious one, but I'm seeing industry cloud focus from ERP vendors, from CRM vendors. All the big global systems integrators have focus on this. So, what's the changes in how a Fortune 500 company would orchestrate their ecosystem of partners as they delve into this area of industry cloud?
You raised a good point of ecosystems. We're seeing more and more of that happen as data becomes something that you can monetize. So let's take an example of healthcare. We're seeing healthcare providers, payers, and provider platforms starting to come together in such a way that you don't know where one stops and the other starts. The processes of each company are getting enmeshed with the other to the point that the boundaries on which revenues are being made are also changing. They are fleeting. So when this happens, you don't know whether you're on the revenue side of this or on the cost side of this or on the platform side of this conversation. Imagine this ecosystem play happening in healthcare. It's happening in, I would say, retail, consumer CPG, and third-party logistics, a third ecosystem. A fourth ecosystem would be around uh, energy infrastructure. And you start seeing these broad ecosystems form. So companies are stopping to think only about themselves and saying, okay, what's their role in the ecosystem? The minute their role in the ecosystem changes, their platform plays start emerging. The minute
Right.
platform plays start emerging and they are in the industry ecosystem, now imagine who should really play a role in industry cloud. Should it be a system integrator or a hyperscaler, or should it be some of these Fortune 500s themselves? That's the answer we need to look for in the next 6 quarters.
Maybe along those lines, to close this section out, what is your advice for any organization that's been dabbling with industry cloud? They know it's something that's coming. Maybe they've got a couple of tiny wins, but they see this wave coming and they want to harness it. What are the steps they should take as we move into the calendar year so that they can help maintain a competitive advantage by taking advantage of industry cloud?
I think if there's one motto we should do this all under as a collective, The motto is profit from the core. So if you go back to think, what is the core of what you do? And how do you profit from that core in terms of data? And how does data actually create a business outcome for your client? And how do you actually monetize that with not just saying AI and insights, but start saying applied AI and insights? Keep putting the business outcome first instead of saying technology first. Instead of saying cloud first, mobile first, AI first, what's the business outcome first that I know I can do because I know how to profit from my core? That's the first step towards industry cloud, because you as a firm will be the only ones who can realize this end-to-end stack. You start seeing some of this happening, for example, in what Johnson Controls does with their Open Blue platform. It's building automation. That is a good example of industry cloud.
Okay, I'm sold. Let's go to topic number two. You said a word that doesn't roll off my tongue, but it has to do with something as a service. What was it? Servitude? What was it? Say.
Well, I hope it's not servitude. It's it's servitization, and it doesn't roll off my tongue easier too. It comes from the entire manufacturing industry. Some call it product as a service. Some call it X as a service. Others call it servitization. It's the entire philosophy of saying, look, I've not sold Paul an asset. So I've not sold Paul a car. I've not sold him a battery, but I've sold him car as a service. I've sold him battery as a service, which changes my complete relationship with you, Paul. You're not someone who bought something from me. You're you're someone whom I serve constantly. It just creates absolute havoc with current business models.
Well, I'm in the research business, so I had to do a little research on this topic, and I learned that the first example of this was in the '60s, a company that ended up being bought by Rolls-Royce. So it's part of Rolls, called Bristol Siddeley. They took their Viper aircraft engines and sold power by the hour. So instead of selling an entire aircraft engine to an aircraft manufacturer, they would sell it to as a service, and that way they could track the maintenance much better. And it was easier for the acquiring companies to afford it and pay for it over time.
Exactly. And now you start seeing the advantages of this exact example. The same company, because they did what they did, found out that there was a lot more sand entering the engines when you fly over the Middle East. They wouldn't have discovered that if they didn't have this business model. And based on that, they had to redesign their engines a little different for planes flying over the Middle East. Right? So these are the kind of advantages you have if you're going from just selling products to product as a service. But it also starts creating havoc with your balance sheet, because suddenly you have not sold inventory. So the inventory is not off your balance sheet. That asset's still on your books. What does this do to your balance sheet? It could create havoc if you're not set up for this. But you also have revenue streams you could never dream of. Instead of selling goods now, you have annuity services, because I've just sold Paul Gottsing an asset for the next 5 years. This could create wonders with your share price, because share price is the net present value of future earnings. Everybody is looking for annuity revenues coming from a product heavy company.
I want to give you an example and see what you make of it. It's one I can relate to because my wonderful wife always wants me to change all our light bulbs to LED. When I go to the hardware store, I have sticker shock and I'm scared to spend all the money up front. And I found out that Philips has a deal with the Amsterdam Airport Schiphol where they've replaced every one of their light bulbs with LED, but it's servitization. So they didn't have to shell out all the money up front. Meanwhile, they have the advantages from day one, and Philips probably sold way more in total to the Amsterdam airport than they would have in just the straight buy it as a product model. Is that a good representation?
That's a great representation. And if we can now start seeing, if you take this example and say, how does it actually reflect back within the enterprise Philips? What suddenly happens
Right.
is you know how Paul is using the bulb or how this airport's using the bulb. Now, your bulb, which was your product, suddenly became your way of knowing your client.
Because IoT and sensors and analytics are taken advantage of in this model.
But if you go back into the enterprise, you have two systems. You have one system called Product Lifecycle Management, PLM, which you use for engineering the bulb. And you have another system for knowing what Paul or the airport wants, and that's the CRM. That's the customer relationship management. Now, you tell me in this connected bulb, which is telling you everything you need to know about the client, where does PLM stop and where does CRM start? Or is PLM our new CRM?
This sounds like a culture change or a mindset change to, what have you seen or what do you suggest above and beyond just the concept, but just to make that push? That's a big change for any product organization to, to, walk that plank.
It's exactly. And I know we say culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm not sure that's true. I think architecture does. So we could have all the culture change we need and mindset we need. But if your PLM system is doing PLM and your CRM system is doing CRM, you could have any amount of culture change. Your system's not supporting it, guess what? You're doing what your system supports. So as we look at PLM programs, CRM programs, and we should come away from thinking in terms of silos and saying, how does my connected asset affect how I think about the client? For example, a lot of automotive firms at the moment don't know Paul and the vehicle ID in the same record. They know the ID of the car. They know the ID of Paul got seen. They don't have the link. They might not have the link. And the more you are hiding behind dealers, the less you have the link, which explains why everybody's trying to go to direct to customer models. So it's going to change the way you structure, the way you architect, the way you think digital threads through the enterprise, the way you think connected revenue models. If we start with these four things, then we can at least define what culture change should achieve. We talk about culture change, but we never talk about the end state of what culture change should achieve. I wish we spoke more about end state than about culture change.
Servitization is my new favorite word. Now, when it comes to sustainability, green, ESG, all the different labels, I know that solar panels were invented in 1954, even before you were born, Prashant, and the electric wind turbine was invented in 1887 in Scotland, before I was born. So this has been around for a while in different forms. We pretty much all care about the earth. And what is it? Why is so? I'm curious why you only had three. I only gave you three things to choose for 2023, and you chose green tech. So what's happening now versus what has happened prior?
What's happening now is at least 2 decades of progress on the tech part of green. So if you look at the amount of the cost of generating power via solar panels, over the last 30 years, they've dropped by 90, that's 90%. The same thing with wind power has dropped 70 over the last 3 decades. So wind and solar have suddenly got much, much cheaper. It's just that they are unpredictable because they rely on forces of nature. So suddenly it's not just about power generation, it's also about power storage, which is where something like batteries come in. So you can start seeing how a topic like sustainability goes from being a goal to actually being an ecosystem of technology. So which is why our focus is as ISG is much more on what are the technology plays coming up now. It could be a hardware, it could be a software, it could be electrical or mechanical. What could be these solutions that are coming up and how do they come together to achieve the common goal? So the common goal could be selling green tech. Another common goal could be creating circular economies. There's a lot of money to be made in recycling. We spoke about this example of batteries having 3 lives. Who takes care of life 2 and life 3 in the 3 lives? What happens when batteries have to change boundaries? Could you buy a battery in Netherlands and then recycle it in Germany? Try doing that. It's not as easy as it seems, right? So how do you design for circular economies, and what could be the brand new sustainability services that come up? Like we expect a few vendors to emerge who specialize in such things. So, and you know about this, Paul, we are starting our own sustainability services North Star. It's at the moment focused on scope 1 and scope 2, not so much scope 3, to see what are these new services that will be bought and sold. This could also go in the direction of design for recycling, green infrastructure. We don't expect any spending to stop on this area, which is why we're tracking it.
Or on the design for recycling, I've heard the term cradle to cradle. I like that. I like But if you're a global 2000 client and you're not, your main focus isn't so much to sell green tech services, but that there's a burst of small and large organizations out there, and meanwhile, pressure from shareholders, pressure from employees is to do all that you can for the cause. So you need to engage with this ecosystem. How do you do it as a global 2000 organization? It must be overwhelming to figure out with all that's happening in green tech. How do you harness the power or pick and choose from a set of priorities to figure out how to develop the right path in 2023 for green tech?
I think as a community, we need new muscles. We are so used to architecting and designing. I'm not sure these verbs are going to help us going forward. We need to be listening more. So instead of trying to think what should we architect and what should we design, we should start listening for conversations within our own industry value chains. So if you're a retail firm, what's happening in third party logistics? What's happening on the CPG area? If you're a healthcare payer firm, what's happening on the provider side? What's happening on the medtech side? What's happening with bioscience and data science coming together? How does that shift my spends from diagnostics to pre-diagnostic? We need to start looking at industry value chains. Some call it ecosystem, others call it industry value chains. And we need to start tracking and listening more. The minute you start tracking and listening more, you start seeing which conversations are happening in the market outside you, outside your office. Some of these conversations might be happening without you. You just don't know about them. So just listening and tracking the conversations would help you to say, okay, what's actually happening? Then you can change gears. You could say, well, of these 10 conversations, you know what? I want to influence what happens in this conversation versus that conversation. I want to influence this. I want to track that. I want to engage here. We should move to a conversation play across industry value chains. And then we can always bring it back to architecting and design. Now, this comes with a downside, Paul. I think that because you're tracking conversations continuously, you can't plan for 3 years down the line. What does this do through 3 or 4 year programs? What does it do for large implementations? That's where I think we should start going from capital A agile to small a agile, right? Thinking agile not in terms of doing agile, but thinking agile in terms of funding, but shipping continuous business outcomes. Tracking such conversations across industry value chains is going to move us towards a small agile.
Maybe that's a way we can close out, because if you these three seem all related, and this concept of agility or composability, being on a journey rather than looking for the huge milestone, maybe not going down blind alleys too much. So why don't you just conclude our talk by kind of tying it all together? If I'm a global 2000 company trying to gain a competitive advantage, trying to win more customers, keep my customers happy, how does industry cloud, servitization, green tech all roll into sort of one mindset moving into next year, and how I approach the business?
And that mindset, given that no one can predict what happens over the next 4, 6 quarters in this market, I think the right way to do this is to remain flexible on how you achieve the outcome, but not give up ambition. But as you do that, not try to do everything on your own, but partner. Partner within your industry value chain. Your client could be your provider. Your provider could be your client. Your provider could be your channel. How do you give up millions of revenue or costs to a provider? Do you sign up for reciprocity as you do that? Is your is your current provider actually your indirect channel? What does this mean to your marketing and channel play? This world is just going to get a little more complex than we were used to. I think the days of large programs are over. The days of partnering are in. Muscles like architecting and designing will help us, but we need brand new muscles for this future. And that is architecting, partnering, listening, and at best, shipping and continuously achieving business outcomes. That would be my summary.
Thank you, Prashant. No one ever said it would be easy, but to gain your insights is really helpful. I know I always learn a lot in these sessions, and I trust everybody else did as well. So thanks for the big three megatrends and taking us through that, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Likewise, Paul, always a pleasure.